Okay, I'm going to give it a few seconds. Welcome everyone to this, our third in a genealogy workshop series featuring the wonderful Nicka Smith as a part of the Black Reparations Project at Mills College at Northeastern. Unfortunately, I'm not able to see how people are flowing in, but I'm going to give it another minute or so. And hopefully we'll have a full room and we can take it from there.
We are at 60 in attendance, so a pretty good number there. I think
We can
get
probably get
started.
started. How cool is this? All right. So it is my honor to welcome everyone here to this, the third in a genealogy workshop series hosted by the Black Reparations Project in Oakland, California, through Mills College at Northeastern, with the support of Amend and featuring the lovely and incredibly knowledgeable Nicka Smith. I am the Associate Director of Belonging for Mills College at Northeastern. And for those of you following the DEI conversation across the country, we are doing our best to hold it down and to be as focused about the work and to support one another as we can. And so I'm equally honored and blessed that there are so many people here in this space now. And I want to encourage you to put positive messages in the chat. There are several hosts here who will be paying attention, and if questions come up, we will take note of them. And there will be time at the end for you to ask questions. It is now time for me to just mark this occasion and mark this moment on behalf of our ancestors, to pour a little bit of libation. And this will be very quick. This entire workshop, as far as I'm concerned, is one long, beautiful libation to our ancestors and to all that they've done, all they sacrificed, all that they fought for. And so doing so is something that I try to do in my daily life, remembering my ancestors whose names I know and those whose I don't. So I have my lovely, you can't see, it's a thermos of water, and I have a plant, and I would just like to pour a little bit of water into this plant and to give thanks to those ancestors and invite them into this experience with us, knowing that we do so in humility, knowing that for many of them, what we are talking about is the realization of what they dreamt of and what they fought for, what they've been writing about, singing about, preaching about, teaching about. This is the divine work of generations of people across the African diaspora. This is a relevant conversation for those of us that are born and bred in America, as well as those who have come here from other parts of the globe. And so I just welcome and honor our ancestors with a little bit of water. And I'm going to ask you to, just in the chat, just to say Ashe. I think if we all unmute, it'll get a little crazy. So Ashe means, in this context, so be it, let it have power. If you prefer, you can say amen, because they hear that too. We know that they are paying attention to what we are doing and that they are pleased. And it again is my honor to know that we are doing this so that we can uplift that hard work that they did and that their sacrifices will not be in vain. So, Ashe. At this time, if you have the names of specific ancestors, whether they are part of your family lineage or people from our collective ancestry that you would like to lift up in the chat, please go for it. I would always like to start by lifting up my parents, Beverly Ann Io Pierce and Lawrence Pierce. Ashe. Please, by all means, put the names of anybody you'd like to lift up into the chat very quickly. Thank you. Whenever I do a libation, I like to think of us as holding their memories and their spirits close to our hearts. And again, with the acknowledgement and understanding that they are here with us and that they are pleased with our efforts. So I'm going to wrap this libation up, but I'm asking that this not be the end of this sentiment and of this moment. Please continue to lift their names and memories in the chat. Continue to hold their names, their pictures of they're in your memories. Just hold them close as we go through this experience. And I'm going to say Ashe to close this out 3 times. Please repeat Ashe, Ashe, and Asheo. I am very thankful and honored now to introduce Dr. Ashley Adams, the director of the Black Reparations Project.
Thank you. Thank you, Ife, and good evening, everybody. I hope everyone is doing well this evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dr. Ashley Adams, and I am the director of the Black Reparations Project at Mills College and Northeastern University, and we're located in Oakland, California. Our mission is to advance education and research on Black reparations, and we create spaces like this one for dialogue and learning, and provide technical assistance for reparative action. As a fourth generation descendant of formerly enslaved people, I am deeply committed to honoring and preserving our ancestors' legacies. And I welcome all of you tonight. If you're joining us from a descendant community, I would encourage you to represent your community in the chat. If this is your first time joining us, I also want to encourage you to visit the Mills College at Northeastern University YouTube page. This is our final series in this, our final session in this genealogy workshop series. And we have posted the recordings from the first 2 workshops on our YouTube. We'll also share that link in the chat. And this session will also be posted as well. And so please like and share the series. We hope that more people will be able to access this, these vital resources that are being shared in these workshops. Through this dynamic series, we have heard from renowned genealogist and documentarian Nicka Smith, who has guided us through the foundations of genealogy research and provided us with invaluable tools for tracing the formerly enslaved. And so tonight, in our final session, she's going to lead us in uncovering ancestral land histories. And as we gather for this last workshop tonight, we're also celebrating Black history, not just for Black History Month, but for every day of the year. We are living in a time of great uncertainty where racial and social inequities are being completely ignored and dismissed as if they are not real. However, I also want to mention that the American Public Health Association has recognized that racism is a national public health crisis and underscoring the urgency of work like this. And so in times like these, it is essential that we remain steadfast, educating ourselves, educating our people and our communities and others about our ancestors' lived experiences and their profound impact on this country and around the world. And so the stories of our ancestors not only ground us, but also inspire us for the pathways forward. And in that spirit, I want to uplift the memory of Bell Hooks, who taught us that education is a practice of freedom. And tonight, we embody that freedom, learning, connecting, and affirming the transformative power of love and community. The Black Reparations Project is committed to cultivating joy, prioritizing healing, and embracing learning as liberation. And so I invite you to join us in these foundational principles tonight as we engage in this session together. And I also want to take a moment, since this is our last session, to give a special thank you to all of our sponsors, with Mills College and Northeastern University, the Northeastern Law Clear, as well as the Nicodemus Historical Society and the descendants of enslaved communities at UVA. And a special thank you to Moya G and Kim M of Emin, the Mass Media Group, who you will hear from a little later, for their technical support throughout this series. Kim is going to be serving as our moderator tonight. And finally, I want to extend my deepest gratitude to Nicka Smith for sharing her expertise and passion with us. Nicka, thank you so much for your dedication to honoring our ancestors. I truly mean that from the bottom of my heart. And we're thrilled to have you lead us in this final session tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and hand over the virtual mic to you now.
Good evening and happy Black History Month to all of you who have joined, to Dr. Adams, Ife, Kim, and Umoya, everyone that is here from Northeastern. We have a lot to share tonight and to talk about tonight. There may be many of you who have oral history about family members owning land. You may have stories about your ancestors maybe leaving said land during the Great Migration or under duress for a number of reasons. That's probably one of the most, repeated pieces of oral history that I have folks tell me about, probably more often than not, is our family land, we left it, or we lost it because of taxes or a number of different things. We're going to go over very broadly how to trace family land. I also want to contextualize this session. As it was mentioned before, this is the third session. So if you are here from the vantage point of, I want to learn how to start my genealogy, this is not that session. We're going to go ahead and put that out there and put it in the atmosphere now. We are not doing that tonight. That was the first session. That was recorded. You can go back to the Black Reparations Project YouTube channel. Thank you, Dr. Adams, and check out the link for the beginning session. We also covered researching your enslaved ancestors. So if you were here for information on that, we have already talked about that. Been there, done that. Train has left the station. We are moving forward, okay? So my suggestion to you is that if you have not watched those previous sessions and you are attending this one, you may get lost because I'm not going over all that other stuff, okay? We done already had Thanksgiving and Christmas. We're not eating ham or turkey, okay? This coming week is filet mignon. It's your surf and turf, okay? It's what you eat on Valentine's Day. Or if you are like me, your family's from Louisiana, maybe you are doing gumbo, or maybe you are eating king cake right about now because it's Mardi Gras season. Let me make it even more timely. Super Bowl was on Sunday, okay? That is over. We are in festival season right now in Louisiana, which means we are leaving behind the baby shower food that we would have ate on Super Bowl on Sunday, correctly? So take this. This is a heated message. There's a reason why this is a series. Do not feel like you have to stay if you don't understand what's going on, but you have resources to get you up to speed. So be sure to use that link. Click on that link. If you are here live, click it now so that you can go to the playlist so that you can watch all of the sessions. All right. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you all. All right, go ahead and give me the thumbs up and let me know that you can see it if you are ready to go. All right, perfect. Okay, in this session this evening, we're going to talk about how our ancestors emerged from the system of enslavement and the fact that they were eager to take advantage of all the rights and privileges of their newfound citizenship. And to even further contextualize this, we are 160 plus days, 160 years rather, into the 13th Amendment. 13th Amendment went through Congress January 31st of 1865. So we are 2+ weeks past that 160th anniversary. And I want you to think about those individuals in your family, whether you have names for them or not, who survived the institution of enslavement to walk into their lives with trying to actualize their citizenship. And one of the rights that they often pursued was owning their own land. So we're going to learn how to identify if an ancestor owned land, how to trace the chain of ownership of land that's been in a family, and how to break down the details mentioned within land records to glean more information. We're going to go through all of that. Again, this is not Genealogy 101, and this is not researching your enslaved ancestors. We are talking about land tonight. All right. Now, to contextualize, we have to set the scene, okay? Let's first talk about the importance of ownership of land, okay? And these are not all the reasons why our ancestors sought to own their land. If there are some that you feel like I have overlooked, or maybe I may have not considered, or you just want to chime in, be sure to use the chat if you are watching this live. Also, be sure to use the comments if you are watching the recording. So what are those reasons? Okay. Why was land ownership so important to our ancestors? Number one, owning land gave them the ability to be self-sustaining or independent. If you think about things from the vantage point of enslavement in the United States, and you were a piece of property yourself, okay? You were working someone else's land that they own the land. And then when slavery ends, you now move into a status of being employee to employer as opposed to enslaved to enslaver. Most of the power that you could have had in your life could have been exercised from the vantage point of your land. Having your land, being able to grow food on your land, being able to have products that you produce that you could sell, ways to keep your family fed, all of those things that allowed you a certain amount of autonomy and independence that you would not get elsewhere. Okay, so that was probably number one reason why our ancestors were so adamant about owning their land. It also created generational wealth. And this is a term we hear thrown around all the time. What do I mean by this? In my experience doing research, I noticed that the earlier a person's family became landowners, the further those person's descendants are in life now. And the reason why I make that kind of equation is that, or just equating it in that way, is that initial generation, that was their first goal, was to own land. The next generation after that, their goal was not necessarily to own land because the generation before them did that so they could pursue other things. When you start moving away from emancipation, the further into the future you get, we are setting up our own schools in terms of HBCUs. That even started before slavery ended in some instances. But your goals are shifting because owning land is not the priority anymore because it's already happened. And there's a great comment in the chat. Bell Hooks borrowed the saying, education is the practice of freedom. Right. It's correct. Correct. Education is freedom, but also in this instance, land was as well. So they wanted to be self-sustaining or independent. They also were creating generational wealth. How do they create the generational wealth? You pass away, you have a will or a probate. Your property is then divided amongst your descendants. That is value, right? Where our souls had value, our personhood had value that could be borrowed against, it could be mortgaged. Now we had land that operated in the same way. And one of the things that I also want you to think about as you hear this information tonight about physical land like soil, also consider that some of this can apply to researching your ancestors as enslaved people. In the same way that you think about land and how you can document or find land in your family history, the same principle could be applied to finding enslaved people. Many of the same records are used. Okay? So let's move forward. So in addition to creating generational wealth, allowing them, again, independence, where we have autonomy, which is the ability to self-govern. If it's my land and I want to put up a fence or I want to do something else, I can do that because that's my domain, right? You can't come on there and tell me what to do because technically this land is mine, okay? Even more, it gave our ancestors a sense of permanence. What does that mean? That means that if this is my land, I can stay here until I die, or maybe when I decide to sell it, or maybe it goes to my children and they can stay here. I don't have to leave. You don't have to take me off unless I'm not paying the taxes or you're trying to push me off by other means, which many of us have that story in our families as well. Someone had a valuable piece of land and somehow some person made a way to get them off of it. Have you all heard any of these stories? Because I've heard these stories mentioned from folks a lot, actually. Another reason, it allowed control over where they were buried. think about this. Prior to this, we were at the mercy of either pooling all of our finances and resources to come together to create cemeteries. Now, if we owned our own land and we had a section that we weren't using, we could leave that behind to serve as a cemetery to bury our deceased. Now, what am I saying tracks with the question, how many generations removed from enslavement are you? Because that also comes into play. For me, my great great grandparents were enslaved. My grandmother's grandparents were enslaved. And here's the aspect of that, okay? Even though my great great grandparents were enslaved, for me and my family, that was the generation that moved into land ownership. It started that early. That generation as well for me, and really the one before that, if you count a specific line of my family, they're the first registered voters in my family. Out of what, 7 generations that goes from me back to my third great grandparents, there was only one where the chain of voting was broken. And I'm bringing this up in the context of land ownership because in some places you couldn't own land unless you paid taxes on land. You were a taxpayer or on your property. Okay. And again, some people got stuck. This is a great comment in the live session. They got stuck in sharecropping. They could never break even and pay off those debts in order for them to get enough money to buy their own land, or they couldn't afford to pay the mortgage off on the land that they bought. So there's a lot of layers to this. All right. So now that we've identified the reasons why, let's learn the ways that you can identify whether or not your ancestor owned their own land. And the first thing is going to be oral history. You likely have family members that have passed down oral history or stories about an ancestor owning land. I know for a fact that with my great grandfather, who I'm thinking about, who I've been sort of talking about over the last few minutes, I knew he owned his land. And I knew that he owned his land because I knew that that was where my grandmother was born. And I knew that that was where my mother was born, was on that land. That land was in the family for a number of years, and it was sold out of our family. And the reason why was because everyone, for the most part, had great migration out of where my family was from. So if you have heard a story about, again, someone owning land, this is more likely the reason why, or one of the leads that you have on whether or not your family were land owners. Additionally, there may be records that exist within your home or within the homes of your family members that also substantiate this claim. These could be things like tax receipts. Because most of us have ancestors that were part of the Great Migration, we may have family members who, despite them leaving the Deep South, they continue to pay the taxes on the land that was associated with our family. And they may have done, they may have still been paying on the taxes. They might have been long gone. Maybe they moved 60, 70 years ago. Maybe they moved 40 years ago, 20 years ago, but they're still paying those taxes. So you might actually see the tax receipts that will confirm land ownership. Additionally, you also might find deed or conveyance records. What are those? Though we're going to go through what those actually are and how to break them down later on in the presentation. But a deed or conveyance related documents are when you have two parties or maybe more, and one party is buying and the other one is selling property. And again, this all fits when you're talking about researching the enslaved as well. In the context of this presentation, we're talking about people buying and selling land, but you will also find deeds and conveyances where enslaved people are sold and the records are formatted in the exact same way that land transactions are documented after slavery and before slavery. So if you find deeds or conveyance, is just another word for deed record, two parties, land being transacted. You may even find deeds of gift. Let's say you have a family member who had land and they wanted to give it to their children, or they wanted to give it to a grandchild or another family member or someone else. You may see that the deed actually has no money associated with it, or it's a very small fee like $1 or $5, that generally indicates that there is some sort of a relationship between the two parties where the land is being conveyed. You might find those records as well in your personal collections. You also may see probate or succession. Probate meaning someone has passed away, they have an estate, meaning they have property, and they may have called for the property to be divided a particular way with a will, or if they died without a will, that property has got to be dispersed amongst the living heirs or descendants. And so you may see a probate or succession records. And the reason why I use two different terms is I'm heavily in Louisiana research. In Louisiana, we don't call them deeds, we call them conveyances. Same thing, right? Just cross the state line into Arkansas and into Mississippi or even Texas, it's going to be a deed. In Louisiana, it's a conveyance. And in Arkansas and Mississippi and Texas, it's going to be a probate. And in Louisiana, it's going to be a succession. It's the exact same thing. That's why I use the terms interchangeably. All right, so let's look at some examples. Here's one that is oral history. This is from a compilation of hearings before the United States Commission on Civil Rights. And it was a exhibit that was submitted in support of a voting rights case. This is my uncle. And even though this record is specifically put together and put into this compilation to document a voting rights case, there is oral history within it about land ownership. And I'm sharing this with you all on purpose because what I want you to see is that sometimes the proof of the land ownership, you're not necessarily finding it through, like, literally there's an envelope that says we own land. It's not going to necessarily be on the nose. You don't necessarily have to have it that way. Note what's in green. This is an affidavit that he is submitting that is under oath, and it says his name. It says in green at the top, I live on a 65-acre farm, which I own, and he's telling you where he owns it, East Carroll Parish, Louisiana. So as of January of 1961, which is when this affidavit was made, we know that he owns a 65-acre farm in a particular parish in Louisiana. If you go down to the next green highlight, it says, after I finished high school, I came back to my daddy's farm in East Carroll Parish and helped him. His name was Lewis Bradford Atlas, and he owned 111 acres of farmland in East Carroll Parish. So we have two different references in this one affidavit for a voting rights case that is telling us that two generations of people in the same family owned land. So you can find clues pretty much anywhere, but I just want to point this out that this was in a voting rights case. So if you did not have any information, you looked through the home repository, you didn't have any deeds, conveyances, no wills, no probates, none of that, you can look at other places to see that you can get this proof. Now, let's say you're looking through the home repository and you do come across a deed or a conveyance. And this is an example of one that is more recent. If you look at the filing date on this, it mentions April 17th of 1979. So this is a recent conveyance. This is a copy of one that could be in the home repository. You see there are 6 different states or 5 different states, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2 parishes in the same state where this document is telling us where these people are who are connected to this land. And note it says at the top, be it known that on the dates at the places before the notary's public witnesses herein after name and undersigned personally came and appeared. And it gives the name of the person, their spouse, where they live, okay, whether they are married or not. And we're going to go through this in more detail a little bit later, but this is what you can potentially see when you have the Great Migration involved with land, meaning the descendants of the original landowner who received the land as a result of an estate or a probate, right? Because they were heirs of the landowner, are now no longer living where the land is located, or the majority of them are not. And in order for them to sell it, they've got to send this document across the United States and have a bunch of notaries in those locations certify this particular sale. So this is not uncommon that you will see California, Illinois, Michigan, Tennessee, and Louisiana in one document. More home repositories. This is an example of a will. Okay, this is a copy of a will. It's a copy of it from an actual will book. It's for Essex Taylor, who was living in Sumter County in South Carolina. And note, it says in green, to sell and to mortgage any and all of my property, real and personal, at public or private sale, making and giving a deed or deeds of conveyance in fee simple, free from any encumbrance or limitations until all my debts are paid. In this will, he is telling them to sell his property to pay for his debts. And this is a will. Do not think that Black folks didn't have wills. They did. I see them all the time, especially if they had property that they were trying to protect, if they wanted to ensure generational wealth. So this, again, is an example of a will. It's giving the powers to sell and mortgage to his wife. That's in the first paragraph. But it's also saying that you can sell my property if I have too many debts. All right, so let's move on. More ways. So we talked about oral history. We talked about the home repository. Also, you can identify this with a genealogical search. What does that mean? That means that as you go along and you collect records through your searches online, there are particular records that will call out to you that someone was a landowner. Primarily, you can find this on the United States Census. If you are in such a rush to get through all of your hints on, on Ancestry or to, keep following everything to get back as far as you can, as quickly as you can, you may skip over the fact that there are a whole bunch of questions on records like the United States Census that ask about land. What do they say? They ask you the value of your real estate, whether you are renting or owning your land, or whether the land was owned or mortgaged. These questions are all over the census. And if you're moving quickly because you're trying to get back as far as possible, as fast as possible, you're going to overlook these things. There are also county and parish records. Again, deeds and conveyances that we talked about earlier, where you may have copies of these things at your home. Mortgage records, maybe from a mortgage company. Civil court documents. Again, someone dies, right? So they might go through probate or succession, or let's say the folks got to fighting over the land, because that's happened too. Maybe your auntie sued your uncle because she thought the land was supposed to be hers, or maybe she had paid the taxes for a long time, and maybe she took out a mortgage on the land and didn't tell the other heirs that she did. Come on now, I'm over here preaching because I know this is a situation that has happened in many families. And so you see the lawsuits going back and forth. Those are records. And here's the thing, if you didn't have the records within your collection, you can find this stuff at the county or parish courthouse. It's there. This is all public records. Again, probates or successions. Let's say you do not have a probate in your personal repository or your personal archive. You can get copies of these things online, whether it's through Ancestry or Family Search, or you can go to the county or parish courthouse to get them. And again, sometimes you may not have ever seen these records, but they'll come up. You'll have the will that'll denote the wishes of the deceased. You'll have an estate inventory where if it's property that's not accounted for within the will that they want to give out, they will come in and value every other thing that's within the deceased person's estate to either sell it or most of the time sell it because it's not been outlined who it goes to or given away, or auctions. Let's say, again, like you looked at that will, sell off whatever you need to pay for my debts. You will see stuff be auctioned off. Again, also think about this from the vantage point of enslaved people. Just like this land I'm talking about, they are in records just like this. Okay. All right. Maps or surveys of land. You will also see that. One of the things that we have at our disposal is called the Public Land Survey System. If we did a session specifically on maps, I would break this down even more, but it'll give you the legal land description of public lands, any state that has public lands. You'll see the reference to the PLSS, or Public Land Survey System. That is something that is put together or managed by the United States Land Office. You can use the national map, which is a website. I think it's just nationalmap.gov. And you can add in a layer that will give you the township range and section. And then you can take the latitude and longitude of that, put it in the Google Maps so that you can drive to it. Because some of you may be interested in going back to some of your historical family land. But again, the genealogical search, it can lead you to maps or surveys of land. Homesteads, my goodness. This is another one, or land patents. You may come across these again with the Bureau of Land Management or the United States Land Office. Homesteads are public lands that individuals, including the formerly enslaved or people of color, could get after they met certain terms of conditions. They had to live on the land for a certain amount of time. They had to be a certain age. They had to apply. And once they went through the application process, you will actually start to see in the newspaper where people are petitioning to get a homestead, and they have to have witnesses who certify that they lived in the place for the allotted time, that they were the age they said that they were, all of that. Land patents, again, it's the same thing. You can find those online. Those will tip you off again that folks were landowners. All right, U.S. Census. Here's one from 1930. Again, multiple United States censuses tell us when people owned land. In particular, if we're looking at 1870, this is not 1870, this is 1930. I'm going to zoom in a second. But if you're looking at 1870, 1870 gives you the value of real estate a person has in one column, and then the value of personal estate. Real estate is soil, is land. Personal estate are cows, livestock, any of that other stuff, furniture, all of that. So if we zoom in on this 1930, look at the green highlighted area for Joshua Spann living in New Orleans. It is telling us that he owns his home and it's worth $3,500. And he's a truck driver. It's telling us that he's a truck driver. That is his occupation. He delivers things. He does drayage. And he's got a son who's 15, who's a newsboy. And his wife doesn't, she's at home. But that their home has a value of $3,500 and they own it. Okay, there's a clue. Parish and county records. Again, here's a warranty deed. And this is dated September 7th, 1881. And it's from Joseph Brown and wife to Simpson Bean. It says, "Know all men by these presents that Joseph Brown and Mary Brown, his wife, of the county of Bourbon in the state of Kansas, in consideration of the sum of $25. See, this is not a whole lot of money. To them duly paid by Simpson Bean of the county of Bourbon, state of Kansas, have paid, and by these presents do grant, bargain, sell, convey to the said Simpson Bean, his heirs, assigns all that tract or parcel of land situated in the county of Bourbon and state of Kansas, described as follows, to wit." Here's the second green shaded area: 4 acres off the northwest corner of the northeast quarter of the southeast quarter of the northwest quarter of section 4 of township 24 south, range 23 east. Remember, I just mentioned to you township, range, and section. Using the public land survey system, you can go to, let's see, it says township 24 south, range 13 east. Then we can browse to get to section 4 of that. And of section 4, we're looking at the northwest quarter of the southeast quarter of the northeast quarter of the northwest quarter. You see how it keeps drilling down? It's telling us exactly where that is. And it also is telling us that it is bounded on the southeast and west by land owned by J.M. Dunley, and on the north by land owned by William, maybe Babington, with all the things that are there, they're giving to them. Okay? So let's say you weren't quite sure exactly where to find it. They're also telling you whose land is surrounding it. Now, here's another thing: probates and successions. I mentioned, right? We looked at the first thing we looked at was a census record tipping us off. We just saw deeds and conveyances. Here's an example of a probate or succession. This is an affidavit for a 15-year-old child. And some of you may be wondering, why on earth does a 15-year-old child have a probate? If you are here watching live, can you guess why a 15-year-old would have a probate? Why would a 15-year-old have a probate? Use the chat. If we're thinking critically about everything that is happening that we've discussed, why would a 15-year-old have land? So someone said land ownership, inherited because he is an orphan and already owns property. They were heirs to property, right? Threat of death, he has TB. Look at you all reading it. Proof, no parents. Parents passed early, made sure they had land. If you have connections going back to Oklahoma, or anyone who is a freedman of the 5 tribes, being the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Muskogee Creek, or Seminole nations, children were able to get land allotments. And because they were able to get land allotments as a part of their citizenship to those respective nations, if the parents wanted to sell the land off for any reason whatsoever, and the children were under the age of 18, they had to go through a court in order for them to sell the land off. If you are reading this in green, it says Clarence is the owner of the north half of the northeast corner of the southeast quarter of the southeast quarter of the northeast corner of the southeast quarter of section 33 and southeast quarter of the southwest quarter of the southwest quarter of section 34, township 26 north, range 18 east. And that some time has passed, that they have been sick and confined most of the time to the bed with what doctors call tuberculosis, and that their mother, who is their legal guardian, is asking the court for order to sell the land as described on account of her health. And I'm making this affidavit to be used in court because she's over the age of 15. And some of you are like, Clarence, that's a boy. No, it isn't. It's a girl. It's my aunt. She eventually died, but in order for them to pay for her medical care, they had to sell off part of her land. And they had to do it with her permission because technically she was the landowner, not the parents. Maps. This is a map that I actually found on Ancestry. This is from a collection called U.S. Historic Land Ownership References. Goes from 1507 to 2000. That's a crazy range of years. And this is again back to Bourbon County, Kansas. In green, you see SF Archer owning 160 acres in townships 26 South, range 25 East. So this information is searchable. You can find it on Ancestry. But again, just think about it. It's the possibility that, again, this is telling you where the land is and that someone is a landowner. Going back to homesteads, this is a paper from a homestead application. In order for you to get copies of homesteads, you have to connect with someone who can go to the National Archives to go and retrieve that information for you. This stuff is not digitized. It is only available in original form where you can make copies or you can do digital scans. In this scenario, this is a document from August 24th of 1896 for a man named Plummer Denham, who is living in Norris, Mississippi. And it notes that full payment has been made for the west half of the southwest half and southeast of the southwest half of section 13, township 5 north, range 8 east in Mississippi, and that it contains 112 acres. All right, so let's break down. I've showed you why people wanted to learn, they wanted to own land. We've talked about how you can find out whether or not someone owned land. Now let's break down what is exactly in the records. And with a deed or a conveyance, you're going to have obviously the seller. They are also noted as the vendor, okay? And depending on where you're researching, they could use these terms interchangeably. They can be noted with or without their location. Think about that transaction we just saw in Bourbon County where it said that Joseph Brown and his wife Mary of Bourbon County, Kansas, that they they were the sellers. They were selling the land to Simpson Bean, who was also of Bourbon County, Kansas. The location of the seller isn't always indicated, but a lot of the times it is. Now, buyer, same situation. They could be also noted as the vendee. Okay, so the vendor is the person selling, the vendee is the person buying. Sometimes the seller is noted as the party of the first part, and the buyer is noted as the party of the second part. Again, both the buyer and the seller, the vendee or the vendor, party of the first part, party of the second part, could be noted with their location or without it. There could be other parties, okay, noted as the party of the third part or fourth part. I've seen fifth and sixth. I've seen all kinds of stuff, especially when you're talking about heirship property. And let's say there's a bunch of heirs. For instance, with my great grandparents, they had 11 children, which then means that when they died, that 111 acres that was mentioned earlier, that then gets dispersed amongst those 11 heirs. And if one of those 11 heirs dies, then their part gets dispersed to their children. So one of the reasons why my family formed a corporation in the late 70s and bought out those early heirs is because they knew there were going to be too many people jockeying for this 111 acres by the time we got to now. So when your family doesn't do that process of people buying each other out or forming a corporation, there's parties of a million parts. There's also trustees. Those are people or entities who are holding the land and property in trust. All kinds of other parties are noted. The date of the transaction is mentioned, the location of the transaction, and it may not necessarily be where the transaction was recorded. For instance, in that Bourbon County transaction, let's say I'm moving from another state. So the Browns are living in Bourbon County and selling me the land, but I'm the buyer and I live in nearby Joplin, Missouri. So it would say that I live in Jasper County, Missouri, or wherever Joplin is. I think it's Jasper County, Missouri. Or let's say I own the land, but I'm an absentee landowner. So my location may not necessarily be where the transaction was recorded. It could be recorded in a number of different places, but note that because it is a clue that can help you further your genealogy research. Now, more records, financial details, okay? It can include the amount paid, whether it's a payment or full payment or a mortgage. If it's a mortgage, and it can include the interest rate, the due dates of the payments. Again, I referenced earlier around deeds of gift. Sometimes you'll see, for my love and affection for Sora Regina Calloway, I'm going to give her a mansion in Claiborne Parish, Louisiana, right? Sometimes you will see that she's agreeing in the chat. She's here live, right? When people give love and affection, that typically means they have a close personal relationship and there is actually no real money being exchanged. You'll see it for $1, $5, or again, for my love and affection, you will see that. Then there's the description of the property sold. And we've seen some of this already. In some places, like where I live in Tennessee, they have this whole thing called Mets and Bounds, and I absolutely cannot stand it. It drives me crazy. What do I mean? You will get back to some of these historic land transactions, and they will literally tell you land bounded on the south by Jesse Carter. And if you walk 5 paces to a stake in the ground. Now, some of y'all are listening to this going, did they really say a stake in the ground? Yes, they did. And they expected the stake to stay in the ground to now. Yes, they did. Y'all, I'm so serious. And I'm like, ain't nobody came back out and surveyed that land to see if that stake is there or if that big tree is there. Well, if the tree got cut down. Y'all, it drives me crazy. They do not have the public land survey system with the township branch and section. It is nutty. Okay, you hear me? But they got it. All right, subdivision and lot, especially if we're talking about urban environments, it will tell you it's in the subdivision. If we are in Oakland, it will be in the Laurel subdivision, Oakland, California. If we are in, it's a number of different places, you will hear the subdivision mentioned in the lot. We talked about township range and section. That's the public land survey system. It may also know who owns the land and surrounding property. You saw that in the previous example I gave you. It may also note who the land was purchased from and the deed or conveyance book and page in which to find that previous transaction. This is key because certain clerks of court or whoever is documenting the land transactions, if they're really good, they're going to tell you land previously purchased from Oya Amakisi, you know, in the year 2024, you know, in deed book 25, page 7 and 24. And then that way, in order for you to look at the chain of ownership, you can go back to that previous transaction and then keep doing that because the clerk documented that. All right, more and more and more. A ton of legal language. Y'all saw bequest, behoove is going to have all that kind of stuff. Keep your legal dictionary nearby, or maybe use Google to help you with some of the terms. You're going to have the signature or the mark of the seller and the vendor. You're going to have that because maybe some people couldn't read or write, but they could still transfer property or sell property. You're going to have witnesses who are witnessing the transaction. Always, always, always keep those witnesses in your pocket because they usually have some sort of deep connection back to the people who are involved with the transaction. Certification by the clerk, along with the date the transaction was recorded. So the actual date the transaction happened, as opposed to when it was recorded, those could be two completely different dates. Could be. Also, the notation when the mortgage terms were fulfilled. Sometimes you will have the clerk come in and write over the transaction and say, mortgage paid in full by this particular date. If it's something in handwriting, you will find that as well. All right, so let's dig in here. Okay, we're almost done. It's almost time for questions. When we're going back to this conveyance that I showed you earlier that was from the 5 different states, we're going to break down things. Here are the sellers. Okay, this is why we had to go to 5 different states, because it's 5 different children. 5. Okay, this is a great migration example. We have one who's living in Los Angeles, another who's living in Chicago, another who's living in Chicago, but a different house, one who's living in Detroit, another who was living in Memphis, another who was living in New Orleans. All of them are mentioned there. Then again, these are the seller locations. California, Illinois, Michigan, Tennessee, Louisiana, 2 different parishes. Then we have who the buyer is. No, it's an incorporation that's within the state of Louisiana. I'm telling you this because, again, I just mentioned in this transaction, my great aunts and uncles and my grandmother sold their interest in their parents' land to a corporation that was formed by their nieces and nephews to keep the land in the family. This happened in the late 70s. They did this. And so the seller is an incorporated organization, and who the organization, the president is acting on behalf of the organization. Okay. Then from there, we get the description of the property. That portion of Jefferson Ridge Plantation, situated in the parish of East Carroll, state of Louisiana, lying in sections 46, 47, 48, 49, in Township 21 North, Range 12 East, in the district of land north of Red River, Louisiana, more fully described as that of a portion of lot number 1, shown on the map in survey. So note, they're telling you where the note in survey, the survey is of that particular land, who the surveyor was, okay, and the buildings and all that other kind of stuff, and how many acres it is. And then they're telling you there's another 13 acres from a different section, okay? Note that they mention here, as per map in this conveyance book. So they're not even referencing the previous sale. They're telling you where to find the survey map, okay? Now, we got the certification and recording date that's up here. Let's move to the next pages. We have more property description up here in blue. Then we've got the financial details. This is $26,000 in 1976, right? But the transaction actually didn't happen until 1979 because they got to arguing. One of my uncles held out. That's the reason why it took 3 years. Then we got the transaction, December 6, 1976. Yes, my uncle held out. He did. And then we've got the witnesses. Looks like Maxine Lee and Betty Haynes, they're there, right? Then we've got the other parties who were there. This is the resolution of the board of directors of the corporation. They're giving permission to the president to buy this property. Okay. We have more financial details. We've got the signature of the seller that's there, all of that. Okay. Now, Here are some tips and tricks on how to identify who has legal claim to land. Because some of y'all are in here potentially being messy because you want to see, can your auntie make that decision on that land that was my grandparents and all that other kind of stuff? Am I an heir or am I not? Well, let's go over that. Okay. We got to establish who's in play, y'all. Okay. Please conduct sound genealogy and family history to flesh out family groups, because when you are focused solely on your branch of the family, you may overlook that there are other heirs. Don't be out here being messy and not including everybody that should be included, right? Great comment about Sanborn insurance maps. And they have them, but they depending on the year and depending on if you're in a major urban area, from my experience, I haven't been able to use those in rural areas because it typically is for urban areas. That's not to say you cannot use them, because they are a great resource. But in my experience with doing a lot of rural research, I have not been able to use those as effectively as I have in urban areas. Again, stop being messy. Okay, if it's great-grandparents' land, great-great-grandparents' land, you got to trace down all those descendants to those living people. Okay, you just got to do it. I'm sorry, you do. Okay. Additionally, you have to figure out what an heir is. That is a person who is legally entitled to the property, okay, based on another person's death. I just want to put this out there. If the person did not claim the child before they died, if they ain't on the birth certificate, you're going to have some proving that you're going to have to do. It don't matter that you got the DNA test from Ancestry or some other place. It's got to be on paper. Are you in for a fight? Okay, we being real transparent. This is family here. Okay, keep that in mind. Okay, now you also have to consider the following. With a probator succession, you got to know how the property laws work in a state. Okay, when you see the term died testate, that means they died with a will. If they died without a will, they died intestate, without a will. Okay. Figure out, again, how does the property work in the state that you live in, as well as the state that you're researching. Okay. In terms of community property, spouses or domestic partners are considered joint owners. But if we're talking about common law property states, spouses or domestic partners are individuals. And there's a difference between the two, because for one, you cannot act on your own in order for you to go and mortgage against it and get liens and all that kind of stuff. You have to have the permission from the other parties. And in the other instance, you do not have to do that. And I done seen some families get into some mess, okay, over this. If only one name is listed on the deed or conveyance, the property is that person's only. You can't go in there shoehorning after the fact unless you go and petition to get that deed updated. Both spouses or partner names must be listed for it to be considered a jointly owned property. This is why we got to have our ducks in a row, people. All right, moving on. Reverse genealogy, okay? With that, instead of working from the present and going backwards to the generations like you're taught for genealogy, reverse genealogy goes from the past and traces to living people. So make sure that you do that. Again, if you're trying to establish heirship, you have to do that process, and don't just do it on your branch of the family and not do your due diligence on the others. Don't be messy like that. Again, reverse genealogy tends to be easier if you do the traditional genealogy first, meaning start from now, trace back through the generations. Okay. So then, okay, here are all the children of this individual. All right. So now that I have that established, let me now take one of those kids that I have in research and try to move forward with them to find living people connected with them. Again, you're just using the same skills of traditional genealogy. That's all you're doing. You're just going in the opposite direction that you are typically supposed to do. And again, use the clues on the land records to help with the searches, right? So let's say I didn't know who all my great aunts and uncles were. If I found that transaction that I just showed you where we broke it down, I would then be able to get information that will help me track those individuals. So then that way I know who's in play in terms of who are heirs. Go back to this, okay? The sellers, we have locations, we have addresses, we know that that's where they are. as of 1979. Then we've got, again, their states, parishes, the buyer and the buyer location. It's giving us that, again, as of this date of this transaction, where the land is, the description of the property sold. We've got that. The certification date is there. If you go to the following pages, again, more information about the exact property sold, the amount of money that it was, the date of the transaction, that was when the money exchanged hands. And then you have the witnesses. Again, the other parties, the signature of the seller. Okay. So I know I went through that kind of quickly, but I think I have admonished enough of you all to make sure that you handle a business so don't nobody get to fighting when you die over your property or your house. Go to LegalZoom if you don't have nothing. Okay. If you don't want to use LegalZoom, get on Pages or Microsoft Word and write your will out. Y'all, what happened with Aretha? Y'all remember what happened with Aretha? And they got to fighting over her estate. Yes, because somebody here is in Detroit, so they know they had the bird's eye view. When Aretha died, they got to fighting over her estate. And there was one will, and then there was another will that was in the couch. I want y'all who are here live to guess which will they admitted in court and said that they had to use. And the people from Detroit, do not answer, because I know y'all already know the answer to this. And somebody already answered. They gave it away. The real will was the one that was in the couch. That's what they use, not the one where we have all of the, pomp and circumstance of legal language. They use the couch will. All right. Questions, queries, conundrums. Can you mention land mineral rights versus surface rights? The difference between mineral rights and surface rights is if you sell a property, like for instance, with the one that I just showed you with that transaction, they conveyed the mineral rights and they conveyed the land rights. Mineral meaning if you have oil or we can even go into like uranium and all kinds of other natural resources, because there's a whole thing going on about a plantation in Virginia and who has rightful claim over those natural resources. Is it the formerly enslaved that worked that property, or is it the slaveholding family? That is mineral rights. The land itself is the land and the soil on top. That is surface. You can convey those rights separately. So when the corporation that my family formed, when they sold that land that you just saw in that transaction, they did not convey the mineral rights. They kept the mineral rights. And I haven't gotten confirmation that we even know there's anything there. But what I do know is that my grandmother and her siblings did allow people to drill on that land in the 70s. How did I find that? I found it in the newspaper, because that's a public transaction to lease your mineral rights to someone else. Why did they accept the couch will? I'm trying to remember why couch will got. I think it was because it was in her own handwriting. They validated that. And I think it was the more recent will. I hate that I'm calling it couch will, but that's the way that you can delineate between it. And it was in the couch, y'all. Like, I'm so serious. If y'all think I'm playing, Google Aretha Franklin will in the couch, and you're going to find what I'm talking about. Right. Can you elaborate on corporate ownership of family land? Yes. So a lot of families, again, are moving towards establishing a corporation to own the land. So then that way the corporation owns it and it is not a bunch of heirs. It's only the people who have basically bought in or are on the board of directors of the corporation. And the thing is, it keeps people's personal assets from being available to use for, let's say, I'm just trying to think of a current example. Let's say somebody back on their child support. I don't know. And they come to forfeit assets the land that you might have in another state, if it's completely paid off or you're paying taxes or something else stuff could be levied against it. So it's one of the ways to help protect the property. Let's see. Right. Yeah. Mineral rights in the newspaper. Again, I know in Louisiana, they have a whole separate section of books that document oil and mineral leases that are separate from conveyances and separate from mortgages. They're in a particular section in the courthouse. But again, when somebody was petitioning to lease their mineral rights, you will find that in the newspaper. Address fire insurance maps, also undigitized county records. So when we talked about Sanborn insurance, fire insurance for people to get, let's say there's a natural disaster like we just witnessed, unfortunately, in Southern California. One of the ways back in the day that they would know which structures were where is they had these maps made by Sanborn. Again, in my experience, those maps are largely in urban areas, meaning like cities, not necessarily, and even in the rural environments, it's the city part of it, or when the folks was in town, it's mostly those, but not necessarily in the more rural locations. With regard to county and parish records, again, we talked about the plat book, or in the one transaction, it mentioned a survey that they had done in 1890. And to go look in conveyance book page C or book C page whatever to go and look at that survey. They also will have plat map books that are large and oversized for you to actually go and they're based on the township within a respective county or parish. A lot of times those records are not digitized and they're not microfilmed. So you actually have to go to the county or parish courthouse to get them. What do you think of land being placed in a trust? Yeah, I think it's fine. Listen, I'm just all about y'all not putting that will in the couch. That's all I care about. Don't put the will in a couch. Go and get it recorded at the county recorder. But if we got to get it out the couch, we're gonna get it out the couch. But just try your best. If people want to place it into a trust, you can do that. Whatever's the cleanest and most prudent, process that you should use for your land, do that. I'm in no way an expert on this. I just got a grandmama and her siblings that, in my opinion, were ahead of their time in setting things up the way that they did. I did not think that they were until I started talking to other families, and they're like, y'all incorporated it. And I was like, this is what happens when you send the kids to an HBCU and they ain't got master's degrees and things. They come up with these different things. So yeah, my whole life has been that, that's kind of crazy, but yeah, it's been that. Interesting comment around family were victimized by eminent domain. Correct. And we didn't even get into once we left the deep South areas where we were having 140, 100 acres, 40 acres, when our families move into these urban environments and they are gerrymandered into specific places. Let's throw back to Sunday. We're watching the Super Bowl in New Orleans, and one of the performers is from Compton. That by itself is a land story. Why? Hurricane Katrina was 20 years ago this August, y'all. And one of the biggest things that came out of that whole situation, and it wasn't just all the displaced people that never moved back to New Orleans. That's part of the story. But it's also the people who did or who were trying to get insurance money because they had not taken their family land and houses through the succession process. Grandmama passed away back in 1985. Here comes this storm in 2005. You haven't taken her estate through succession. And now we got all these heirs and you want to get the insurance money and you can't get it because there's no clear title to the land. So we don't even know who owns it. Let's go back to Compton. Okay, so we got the Super Bowl in New Orleans. Go to Compton. That's where Kendrick Lamar is from. Why were there so many Black people in Compton? Because they opened it up because they were redlined out of other areas. And then if we go to Inglewood, think about all those folks that was in Inglewood. Think about that big stadium that's there at SoFi. Isn't that where they're going to the Super Bowl next year? I think that's where it's supposed to be. Maybe I'm crazy. But that is right next to a predominantly Black area. And the more that stadium starts to proliferate and grow and get bigger, those Black folks whose homes are over there are likely going to be encroached on with eminent domain, because we've seen it happen before. Right. Yes. And this has happened to not just Black folks. Think about during World War II, what happened to the Japanese who were interned all across the United States, not just in California. What happened to all their properties? Yep.
Looks
Restrictive
like we had
covenants,
a
right?
question scroll past. What about families who were expelled from their lands by racist violence? Any remedy for that?
Well, here's the thing. It really all depends what survives in the paper trail. If you're going to try to fight it or debate or question, um, because you have to be able to prove it out on paper. A judge is not going to just, well, my grandmama said that is not going to be enough. Unfortunately, it is not. So you have to have your documents, and you have to have your records and your documents. Um, and yeah, like that, it's harder to prove out. And the other thing is, especially if your family left an area, you don't know how the folks documented whatever the transaction was where the land exited your family. Um, yeah. So that part, again, one of the ways that you can maybe be able to dig into it a little bit more is see if it was covered in the news. You think about the scores of folks whose properties were burned down or destroyed during Tulsa, and the fact that they had insurance. And if you go and read through the historical records, the insurance company wouldn't pay them out because they considered it an act of God.
And I have another quick question, Nicka, on the family trust or incorporating the land. You mentioned that you had an uncle that was holding out, and then the family members that do, be a part of this incorporation. Is it essentially cutting other heirs out if certain family members incorporate, and then there are heirs outside of that bucket?
Well, technically not in this instance because the original heirs to the land sold it to the corporation. So, and they were all alive. There wasn't anyone who had died and didn't have, right and title to the land. When they formed the corporation, they gave other cousins the ability to buy into it. So in essence, it was kind of removing the people who were disinterested and focusing on the people who were interested from a financial standpoint, and protecting those folks' assets. This is a great one of my cousins that's connected to the family with the deed is in here, and I knew it. This is why I mentioned it, because she lives near SoFi. She said a friend of theirs received an eminent domain letter because their home is near SoFi Stadium. There is talk of making the family's move to clear the area to expand with a freeway exit for easier access to the stadium. What did I tell you? It's a tale as old as time. Or when you see Black land where they want to make a lake, so they move everybody out and flood it, it becomes a lake.
Or a park, and I see in the chat here a parking garage.
Right.
Do you hear of any instances back south of people having their land returned? I know with the Bruce's Beach out here in California, they recently had their beachfront property returned through legislation, through a bill, legislative action that returned the property to them. And I'm going to have to do air quotes here, because there were stipulations because of strict zoning that they wouldn't be able to do anything with it. So ultimately, they ended up selling it back to the city of LA for a stipulated amount of $20 million. But they, championed it as an act of restoration and giving back property that was taken through eminent domain.
Yeah, I haven't heard of any of that in the Deep South at all. Mm-mm. And I think one of the big reasons why it hasn't happened is because the people who have the resources to fight for that are no longer living there. Yeah.
Urban renewal, another way to remove people from the land. Yes. Okay, so it sounds like your advice is get ready, stay ready, so you don't end up being, blindsided by this information in the end. I also have family from Louisiana, and I've seen those type of heirs property splits where all of a sudden there's 80 family members that you didn't know about. And that's what I was asking about in incorporating the trust. If potential family members that you just don't know who you are, or they are, or how to get in contact with them could be left out when families are incorporating. But it sounds like your situation was a little different, that everybody was on board.
Right. And I would also add as well, there's a question around county tax rolls to help narrow down and determine a relative's death, assuming the land hasn't been sold. Yes. In fact, with this particular branch that I focused on in this particular presentation, that's one of the ways I found out the approximate date when my third great grandfather passed away is because he stopped paying property taxes. He fell off the property tax roll. And he wasn't on the next census that was within like 7 or 8 years. So because he falls off the roll about 1891 or 1892, I can approximate his death to be around that time period. His sons keep paying taxes on their land and their livestock, but he falls completely off of it. So either they sold it, but I haven't found where a transaction like that happened, didn't find a will or, a probate or a succession. So either he gave away his stuff and died, or, a combination potentially of both. Let's see. Yes, West Oakland, in particular, one of our genealogy buddies, his grandmother was I think the lone holdout of her house for them to construct the West Oakland BART station. And she refused to sell her property. They tried all kinds of means to do it, and somehow her house ended up on fire.
All right. Anyone have any questions? Would you like to raise your hand and come up to the stage and ask a question? Oh,
Actually, Kim, looks like somebody said, what will happen to the black land in Altadena, California?
You
I don't
have
know if you
to
have.
Yeah, I would say again, we already have a template for how this thing plays out. Look at New Orleans. That gives you your answer as to what will likely happen. Unfortunately, in Altadena, we can hope that because those families were there for the amount of time that they were, that they had their ducks in a row in terms of everything being really straight and to the point on paper. But a lot of those properties were multi-generation homes. And if folks did not take their family members through the process of probate and or they just kind of had a very, just loose process for how the taxes got paid and who paid the insurance and all of that, again, it becomes a headache and it makes things so much harder. So excuse me, I'm hoping that's not the case there, but I've watched what's happened to New Orleans after the storm. And a number of people use that as an opportunity not to come back. They took the insurance money and they left and they went to different places. And I'm hoping that doesn't happen there. But again, people potentially use it as a way to reset. So it's very possible.
okay. We have a question here from Rosalind Miller. I'm going to bring to the stage here. Rosalind, you've got the floor.
Nicka.
I
I found during my genealogy research, and this I found it probably a couple years ago, a newspaper article, and it was an order of publication of land in Augusta, Staunton, Virginia, for on my father's family, and he's listed in there as one of the owners. And it was land to be taken by eminent domain to install a water storage tank. The article came out. It came out in 1975, and he had already left the state, and he had passed away. He passed away in 65. So I would assume that he didn't respond because I had no clue about any, at that time, I didn't even know about Virginia. So I don't believe there was any response from him. Should I use, I was thinking of using this article and just start going to research back to see if they took all the land or if there was anything left.
Correct. Because it's likely giving you the description of where it is and potentially who they bought it from, depending on the legal notice in the paper. Sometimes they include that, sometimes they don't. But because it's so much more recent, use that as like your springboard to go to the county or, to the county office to see if you can get back to the original transaction. Because was it him and a bunch of other people who were heirs?
Yes, there's a bunch of other
Right. So then you've got to figure out who the original owner was. You know what I mean? And if you've built your tree out and you're researching your family broadly and you're seeing these names, you can do things like if you're using a standalone genealogy software, or maybe you have your tree built on Ancestry, you can, go to your tree and search for the other people mentioned. Make sure that you've got your tree, your father set as the home person. And once you go into your tree and search for those other people mentioned, you can see his relationship to them, which then will tell you who the original owner was. Does that make sense? Because if it's someone that you're like, I don't really know who that name is, you go to research them, you find out that they're a second cousin of your father. That means that the land came from his great grandparents.
Okay. Yeah, I think I have most of them already in my tree. So yeah, I'll go back and look at that.
Good.
Thank you.
Good luck.
All right, it doesn't look like any other hands are raised here. So with the little bit of Q&A time we have left, I'd like to ask one more question. What are some steps people can take in advance to kind of secure their land, like a living will, or can you do like an advanced succession or something of that nature before you transition to make sure that everything's going where it needs to go?
Right. I think number one, make sure you have clear title. So if you're the first person in your family to buy that respective property that you have, 9 times out of 10, you have clear title. But if it's heirship land and property, you really need to make sure that the title is clear. What does that mean? That means that that if there are other heirs, you know who they are, who's paying the taxes on the land. Because here's the other thing, because your cousin is paying the taxes, depending on certain jurisdictions, and if you have a particular judge who thinks a particular type of way, that cousin who's paying the taxes can petition the court to become the sole owner because they've been paying the taxes the whole time. They're financially interested. So my suggestion is make sure that title is clear. The other thing you want to do in the process of making sure the title is clear is in that process, you're learning if other heirs have mortgaged against the property, meaning have they established loans where they use that land as collateral, because then that means that it's not free and clear. And if it's 15 acres and there's 75 heirs, that means that one person who mortgaged against that little land, you know what I mean? You got to map out all them 75 heirs on the little 14 acres for however much they own, right? Or they own. So clearing that title is so important. You might have to take people who passed away many years ago through the process of probate or succession in order to do it. But I highly suggest that people do it, because then you can then make decisions You can decide to sell it. You can, lease it out, do whatever you want to do. And you don't have the restrictions. There's a comment in here from one of the genealogy buddies that I have, because she's got family that lives in Altadena, and her cousin is 83 years old trying to deal with all the paperwork, FEMA, all these agencies, all of that. And she says that she's thankful that they have younger family members to assist. But what if you don't have that? That means you're going to have to get a lawyer, or you're going to have to seek legal aid. Like, again, it may seem like it is a whole lot of work and cumbersome, and you just don't feel like it. If you do it now, it is going to make things so much less just stressful when you have to actually go through the process, especially for the people that you're leaving behind. Do the hard stuff now. And yeah, just do it now. So make sure you have that free and clear title. If you don't, one of y'all is going to have to go to that courthouse to go and do that reverse deed search, or you're going to have to pay for somebody to go down there and do it, to make sure that it's clear. And then the other thing is, I've also heard of this, people could be paying on the taxes and have squatters on the land and not even know. So they know y'all don't live there. So they just taking advantage. Are you paying the taxes?
Yes, it's quite the conundrum. Well, it looks like we are at time for Q&A. Thank you, Nicka, again for such an informative webinar today on, searching out these family lands, keeping them in the family. Stay ready so you don't have to get ready is what it sounds like the message here is today. And that's why, we do the work that we do at California for a Just and Equitable California here in California. Some of you may have heard about the reparations movement, modern reparations movement that's been going here in California. We were the first state to create a reparations task force to study reparations and develop proposals to put reparations into action. Unfortunately, in the last legislative session, we were unsuccessful. Well, I won't say we weren't unsuccessful, but the bills did not make it to the finish line. But we're not going to stop fighting for many of the reasons that you just heard Ms. Nicka explain. A lot of our land has been stolen and plundered out from under us. So we're trying to correct those things. And one bill that actually did get voted on in the Assembly, it made it all the way to the governor's desk, was SB 1050, and that was about eminent domain land return. Unfortunately, the governor vetoed that bill, but there is a version of that bill that will be moving through the legislature in this upcoming session. Again, it's been a journey, and it hasn't been an easy one. And I'll just tell you all the truth here today. It's not that the bills that we were fighting for, which I just explained, the eminent domain bill. There was also a bill to create a Californian American Freedmen Affairs Agency that would help people trace their genealogy and help to implement reparations payment. That bill didn't even get voted on, didn't make it to the Assembly floor. Also, a fund which I was calling like our piggy bank. It was just a fund. There was not even any money attached to it. They were just creating a fund in our California state budget that could start to collect different sources of funding to pay out reparations. And what happened was our Democratic California Legislative Black Caucus refused to bring those bills to the floor. They really didn't give us any reasons that were valid, but that's what happened. But so we're back pushing again this year. And Ashley, if I could, since this is a year of action and trying to move these bills to the floor, if I could put in a call to action that our coalition is doing right now. To get people to reach out to the California legislator, the representatives, and just let them know, hey, we'd like your support on reparations bills in 2025. It's a simple call to action. You can let me know when you come to the stage, if I could drop that in the chat. But you just 3 clicks and it sends the information to all of the lawmakers that, we're targeting with this information about the upcoming reparations session. So, anybody can participate. You don't have to be in California. You can be all across the nation. We're looking for everybody to show support in this effort, so we can move this forward and start, securing our family lands and making sure that it stays in, within our lineage family. So thank you for this time today. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it to Miss Ashley to close us out.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kim, for letting us know what's going on in the reparation space. Thank you so very much, Nicka, for that awesome presentation. It was very informative. And we're, thinking about ways to continue this work. So there's more to come from the Black Reparations Project around genealogy. This has been an amazing experience. And so I just want to thank everybody who took the time out to come tonight. And also encourage you again to check out the video recordings. I put the link in the chat. I also wanted to again mention that we are hosting a Black Reparations Conference. It's a 2-day event on February 27th and 28th at the end of the month in a couple of weeks. And the name of the event is Towards Justice, Addressing Racial Violence, Advancing Legal Clarity, and Restoring Community. And on the first day, we will be centering federal reparations. This really is going to highlight a project by professor and former judge Margaret Burnham, who is a professor in the law school at our Boston campus. This conference will be hosted at our Oakland campus, but Professor Burnham will be coming to launch her federal reparations project on day 1, which is a landmark initiative focused on advancing federal legislation to address the government's failure to act against lynching and racial violence during the period of 1885 to 1865. On day 2, we will have a little bit more of a variety of the things that we're going to be talking about. It's going to be a forum that's dedicated to exploring reparative justice and through panel discussions on different topics, including systemic transformation in healthcare and criminal justice, legal clarity, and also restorative community healing and belonging. So there will be a lot going on at our conference, and we hope that you can join us. If you're not able to join us in person, we also will have a hybrid option. So encourage you to sign up. Nothing else. You can get the video recording if you're not able to join us at all, and you can watch it afterwards. And more to come. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you all have a nice evening. Take care.